And it's only now that we begin to see just how dramatic, dangerous, full of interest and peril that relationship turns out to be. Nature has become a remarkable protagonist in the drama on this planet all of a sudden. I wrote the first book about climate change for a non-scientific audience, a book called The End of Nature in 1989, which is a long time ago. I'm well aware that there are a number of people in this room who weren't yet born. At the time, we did not know exactly how hard and how fast climate change was going to pinch. We knew that it was going to be a great crisis. We understood enough of the physics and chemistry to know that when you burn coal and gas and oil, you put carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We knew its molecular structure trapped heat that would otherwise radiate back out to space. It was clearly going to heat the planet, but how fast and how dangerously. The story of the last 30 years is the story of that change coming much more quickly, biting much harder than we had expected. We live now in a world where the temperature is 1 degree Celsius higher, and where things have begun to change in the most profound and perilous ways. And you can see it wherever you look. We've lost half the sea ice in the summer Arctic. Think about that. Think how much heat it takes to melt meters thick, millennia-old ice that cover a continent-sized area of the planet. The extra heat that we trap with the carbon we've put in the atmosphere is the equivalent, the heat equivalent each day of about 400,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs. That's what it takes to melt that kind of ice. Look at the oceans. This is an ocean planet. 70% of our planet is sea. 30 years ago, no one even bothered to worry about things like the chemistry of seawater. It seemed far too vast for us to affect. But in fact, that carbon accumulating in the atmosphere, some percentage of it is absorbed in the ocean, and it's been enough already to change dramatically by about 30%. More acidic. The ocean's pH is changing. If you stick a strip of pH paper in it now, it comes out a different color than it would have 30 years ago. That is taking its toll in the most sorrowful ways. I was in the Pacific this time last year working with our colleagues at 350.org in the Pacific, and happened to be there in the 2-week stretch when a wave of warm water came across the Pacific and the Indian Oceans, and in many places wiped out 80, 90, 100% of the coral reefs around island after island. The Great Barrier Reef, the largest living structure on this planet, is half as living as it was a year ago. 50% of it wiped away, just like that. We see the same thing when we look at the hydrological cycles of the planet, the way that water moves around the earth. If you want one fact to help you understand the 21st century, it's probably simply that warm air holds more water vapor than cold. When you raise the temperature, you allow the air to absorb more water, so you get more evaporation in arid areas, and hence more drought, and we see lots of it. Witness, for instance, the endless outbreak of forest fires across the west this year, across Siberia, across Canada. And then once that water vapor is up in the atmosphere, it's going to come down. Water vapor, on average, only stays, a molecule of water vapor only stays in the atmosphere about 7 days. And so when it comes down harder than it ever has. In this part of the world, we've seen about a 75% increase in the kind of storms that drop 2 inches of rain in 24 hours, the real gully washer kind of storms that do nobody any good, that wash away farmers' soil. In fact, the only political class that which there is no climate denial whatsoever, are people who run public works departments across the northeastern United States, because they spent the last 20 years ripping out 8-inch culverts and putting in 12-inch culverts everywhere they can, because the old book that tells you how big the culvert's supposed to be doesn't work anymore. We're on a different planet. And we see it in the wind that sweeps across the planet. The month of September, ending tomorrow, saw more hurricane activity, they call it accumulated cyclone energy, in the Atlantic than any month since record-keeping began in 1851. Those winds that swept across Puerto Rico were almost beyond belief. To watch the eye of a Category 5 hurricane mow through a heavily populated area is a frightening, frightening experience. They think that 80% of the crops in Puerto Rico were wiped out in the course of an hour. It looks like the economic damage to Puerto Rico is equivalent to about 1/3 of its annual economy. The governor said today that their estimate is that development, it will take them 25 years to get back to the place where they were 2 weeks ago in terms of the size of their economy, the construction of their infrastructure. And one prays and hopes, but without great conviction, that in that 25 years there won't be another storm that comes across and does it all again. So far, as I said, we've raised the temperature of the planet 1 degree. The scary thing I have to tell you tonight is that we're still pretty early in this process of warming the planet. And even if we kept every promise that everyone made at the Paris Climate Accords 2 years ago, which we now know shamefully that our country has decided that it will not keep, the country that's contributed the most carbon of any to the atmosphere over history, shamefully reneging on its promise to the rest of the world. But even if everybody had kept their promises, the temperature would still rise about 3.5 degrees Celsius in the course of this century. And if we allow that to happen, if we do not work far faster than we're currently working, then we won't be really able to have civilizations like the ones that we're used to having. That's what's at stake here, the kind of civilizations that, among other things, produce the magnificent artifacts that fill the halls of institutions like this one. Those are the products of civilizations where people have some margin, some time, some ability to do something other than fight off what is around them. And that's what is at stake. And of course, it is at stake most immediately for the poorest and most vulnerable people on the planet. Climate change is in almost perfect inverse proportion to how much of the problem you caused. That's who gets hit hardest. These are the people in the Pacific, in the islands, nations like Tuvalu and Vanuatu and the Marshalls and Micronesia and the Solomons, and places that probably won't be here at the end of the century. But they're fighting like crazy. Their slogan is, "We're not drowning, we're fighting." And so when we were all marching in New York City 3 years ago, they spent the summer building in each island a canoe, a traditional canoe, one big war canoe per island. And they took them to the biggest coal port in the world, not far from there, in Newcastle in Australia. And for a day, they blockaded the biggest warships in the world with those half a dozen canoes, and they kept them in port, and it was an extraordinary witness. And it's one of the things that's really helped foment this rising in Australia. I think we're going to be able to beat plans for what would be the largest coal mine in the world that they're trying to build right near Newcastle. Some huge measure, because indigenous people of Australia and of the islands have risen up to take the lead. Those are astonishing pictures. Much the same set of images coming from the Pacific Northwest in this country. 2 years ago, 3 summers ago now, Shell Oil announced that they were going to go drill for oil in the Arctic. Think about that for a minute, okay? Scientists explained that if we heated up the planet, the Arctic would melt. Shell Oil and its ilk ignored that, went ahead, heated up the planet. Indeed, the Arctic did melt. Did this convince Shell Oil that perhaps it should get out of the oil business and start building solar panels or wind turbines instead? It did not. Shell Oil and its ilk looked at that and said, well, now that it's melted, it will be easier to drill for more oil in the Arctic. If you want an example of human folly that tops anything in any of, anything in Shakespeare or Aesop or any place else, that seems to me a pretty good candidate for just about how depraved and foolish human beings are capable of being. But happily, there's all kinds of other human beings too. And so when they went to move that giant drilling rig out of the port in Seattle and take it up to the Arctic to drill for oil, they were met by thousands upon thousands of people in small craft. We called them activists. A coinage that I quite liked, I must say. And they accomplished their job. The drill rig did get up to the Arctic, but the brand damage that Shell sustained was so intense that within a couple of months, Shell said, forget it. We're not going to drill for oil in the Arctic anymore. We're done up here. That was a great victory, and a great victory of this motif. The fight for the future is the fight of the small and many against the big and few. Okay? And that is as classic a fight as literature has and art has to tell us about. And now it plays out in our time. And what makes it a compelling story is we do not know how it will come out. I wish that I could tell you that if we all did the right things, we would win at this point. I mean, that's sort of the traditional story. Dr. King, my great hero, ended all his talks with that line that I think he took from Theodore Parker, the abolitionist, and I think Barack Obama borrowed it from him later on. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. This may take a while, but we're going to win. Okay? That was a very comforting notion to have. It is a very comforting notion because that fight is by no means over. The arc of the physical universe is short, and it bends toward heat. If we don't win soon, we will not win. This is the first time-limited test that human beings have come up against. If we let it go very much farther, there are scientists who think we may already have let it go too far. It is not a good sign when the largest physical features on Earth, the ice caps, are disappearing before your eyes. There's a lot of momentum out there. So I do not know how it comes out. The best science indicates that if we do everything right from here on in, we can't stop global warming, but we may be able to stop it short of the place where it endangers our civilizations, but that is very much an open question. If we have a window, it is a narrow one and it is closing, and it is therefore our job to figure out how to prop it open, how to keep this struggle alive, how to do enough, which is an awful lot in our time, so that the next generation of people will have some fight to be able to continue on their own. We can't win this fight in our time is what I'm saying, but we can lose it unless we go very, very hard now. The planet is way outside its comfort zone. That's what it means to watch the coral reef disappear in the course of a few weeks, okay? Since the planet is way outside its comfort zone, we need to be way outside ours. Not doing small, incremental change around the edges that will take an enormously long time to get something done. We need to be pushing as if we were in the kind of crises like wars where we have pushed with real focus in the past. Okay? We need to be building not one factory like the one that's being built here, but dozens. We need to be stopping immediately any new fossil fuel construction of any kind, anywhere we can. And we need to be committed to going to 100% renewable energy in every city and town in this country and in this world immediately. We can't do it tomorrow, but we can do it the week after if we got to it. And we should, of course, be beginning by airlifting in every solar panel we can build to Puerto Rico, because why the hell would we rebuild the same? When I say, I've gone on a very long time, and I will stop. When I say that one needs to go outside one's comfort zone, let me just, I was looking at those pictures, I was thinking about those actions at the start of the fight about Keystone. Because I was talking with friends about it today. We were doing some planning because, as you know, Donald Trump wants to build the Keystone Pipeline again, and they may begin construction next year if Nebraska grants the necessary permits. There's a huge fight going on. We're probably going to end up, you know, if it comes to it, out in the cornfields of Nebraska, sitting down in the way, doing what we can. I remember writing a letter that asked people to come to Washington and get arrested, which is not an easy kind of letter to write, really. One of the things I said in it, and I see this looking around the wonderful diversity of this audience, including its diversity of age, one of the things I said in it was, I didn't think that young people should have to be the cannon fodder for that particular part of this fight. Young people are leading this battle everywhere around the world, as you've seen from these pictures. But if you're 22 right now, you know, you probably don't need an arrest record on your resume as your best friend. One of the few unmixed blessings of growing older, however, is past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do? People, when they came to Washington, how old are you? Because that would be rude. But cleverly, we said who was president when you were born. The two biggest cohorts came from the FDR and the Truman administration. On the last day, there was a guy arrested with a sign around his neck that said, World War II vet, handle with care. He'd been born in the Warren Harding administration, which was so long ago I'd forgotten there was a Warren Harding administration. The point was that the young people who were there actually got to see their elders acting the way that we need elders to act in a working society. You all have to go get arrested, though you might, in one thing or another. I've had an extraordinary number of people tell me that it's now on their bucket list of things that they're planning to do. Okay? But I do need you very much to be way outside your comfort zone, working. This is the challenge for our time. In the way that in our parents' and grandparents' time, it was fascism in Europe, and people had to get on a boat and go across the ocean and get killed in very large numbers to prevent it from happening. No one's asking that of us, okay? But we do have to throw down here, and in a serious way, in order to try and make this change happen. And that's why we've set up things like 350.org and all the other groups of people that are working on this, and find one and join in. Not any guarantee that you're going to win, because we don't have that guarantee. Just in the knowledge that you have an extraordinary number of brothers and sisters around the world who are engaged in this fight, many of them in places that didn't cause the problem, but nonetheless are willing to work with everybody else to try and end it. It is the fight of our time, and for those of you who are willing to engage in it, let me just say thank you, and it is a great privilege to get to stand shoulder to shoulder with you. I'm always hopeful when I'm in. I think that New York State is one of the most hopeful places in the country right now, for all kinds of reasons. And I was just reflecting that, among other things, the Attorney General of this state, Eric Schneiderman, is living up to the kind of Teddy Roosevelt tradition of taking on the powerful. It's good to see New York in the forefront of trying to take on Exxon and do that kind of stuff. Buffalo is one of the
cool centers of stuff that's happening all of a sudden. I mean, you got this enormous solar panel factory going in. You've got people fighting for local agriculture and renewing all kinds of local economies around here. I don't think we're going to call it the Rust Belt much longer. The rust is getting flaked off, and all kinds of good green growth coming underneath.